try and take it easy. This is pretty comfortable. I just sit here and do a presentation. So I want to talk to you about application networks. All right. So today I'm going to be talking about an emergent concept we're seeing. We're helping to define. We're not the only people doing it. Around how enterprises are using or starting to use APIs and microservices, and how that's changing the dynamic, not just of the software landscape, but actually the dynamic of the company itself. And I know this is an architecture conference. This is going to be very high-level architecture, but I think there's a really important thing to be learned about how the enterprise is changing, how the companies that some of you work in are changing, the way they're thinking about the balance and power of IT being centralized versus being decentralized in the organization. So it's a fairly light, you don't have to scribble too much or anything, but I'd like to just help you understand what we're seeing. So before I go into the technology and how and the why, I wanted to just describe what I think the industry is suffering right now. And I've got a simple graph, right? So time across the bottom, demands on IT on the x-axis, and IT delivery capacity has remained pretty constant the last 5 years. So even though we've invested in architecture and our processes have gotten better, the budget has also been cut from central IT, and some of that money is going to other groups inside the organization. Yet the challenge is, with all the big macro trends around cloud and SaaS adoption, around sort of big data analytics, especially real-time big data, for B2C companies, mobile, companies shifting to mobile-first application platforms, and increasingly digital competition, the demands on the traditional IT organization that has been centralized and has been focused on delivering projects is starting to break. Right? There's a big gap developing. I don't know how many of you work in IT. Can I quick show of hands? That's good. So everyone else who's in here, what are you doing here? Was there free food or something? No. Although I love the food here, so I wouldn't blame you. So, what we talk to our customers about, and actually what they talk to us about, is they've got this problem. And they often come to us and they say, we have to move faster because we cannot keep up with the demand from the business. And they can't keep up with the demand because every corner of the business now needs technology to function, to operate, and to compete. The reason why we have shadow IT, you've all heard of shadow IT, probably. Shadow IT is just a reaction to this, that central IT cannot deliver all the needs of the business, so what the business does is they go and start doing their own projects, they try to do their own thing. But the problem is, if they're successful, then they go back to central IT and say, hey, I still need to connect to all those important systems that you guys run. You need to make me do it, you need to do it now, right? So they put a lot of pressure on them. And when I speak to people, they often say, we just need to move faster. That's the way everyone starts. We just got to move faster, we can't move fast enough. And I try and explain to them, the reason you can't go fast enough is because of this demand that is being put on you. Somewhat unfair demand sometimes. But it's only getting worse. This isn't a blip, this isn't suddenly going to change and you're not suddenly going to catch up and everything's going to work. There's going to be more and more demand, because if you look at the strategies for companies over the next 3, even 5 years, 8 out of 10 of the major initiatives that companies are looking at have digital right and center. And by digital, I mean they need access to data, they need access to resources, and they want to build new products and services that engage consumers with those assets. They want to be able to go into emerging markets quicker and create new products quicker. They want to get new products introduced into markets quicker than 18 months. They want to do it in 3 months. So the challenges aren't going away, right? This is the landscape of many IT organizations. And the problem is, and as architects, many of you might feel this, architecture has been de-emphasized in favor of delivery, right? Because we've had to move faster, probably a lot of your day job is actually helping developers just get through the project workload and trying to keep the wheels on and make sure the lights stay on and things like that. And that's not going to get any better unless we change something. And what we talk to people about is this model, this central IT delivery model is buckling under its own weight, and there needs to be a different approach. And there's a reason why DevOps is very much in favor right now, and why microservices make a lot of sense to people, why APIs seem to be popping up everywhere, because they're pieces of a puzzle that mark a bigger change in organizations, and I want to talk a bit about that. So in the light of this, what we talk about is, what if you could change the dynamic here? What if you could open up some of the capabilities that IT has and allow other people in the organization to self-serve that capability? What if you spent some of your time focusing on building reusable assets, reusing APIs, reusable services? And I'll talk about SOA in a minute, by the way, because I know you're probably thinking that. But the key with these resources is you don't build them to allow your own little IT group to run more efficiently and more quickly. You build these APIs and these resources to enable different groups inside the organization to be more efficient and run more efficiently. Essentially, you package them up so they can be actually self-serve or very light touch serve assets. And an example that I've seen work very well in large organizations is this idea of putting read-only APIs on top of the data warehouse. Read-only APIs are nice and safe, no one's touching state, so you can cache them to the nth degree. But by doing so, what you can do for projects is, rather than the way many people inside large organizations get data from the data warehouse, I'll use an example, Unilever. It would take them about 20 weeks for a project request to go in until they get the data back out. And it takes 20 weeks because they've got to prioritize that project, they've got to go and talk to the owner of the data warehouse, they've got to then attach a resource, a person who can work with the consumer to define what data is needed. Then they've got to schedule that project to get the person to write the scripts or whatever it is they need to write to get the data out. Then they provision a new database somewhere, they put that data in another database because they don't want anyone touching the data warehouse. And then they've got to set up an ETL backscript that weekly or nightly syncs that new data set with the data warehouse. Do that 1,000 times and imagine the mess you have. That's like every major organization I've ever set foot in. Right? And there's no wonder it takes 20 weeks because there's so many steps involved. And so what we've done with Unilever, we said, why don't we do this? Why don't we actually build a simple API strategy for building read-only APIs on top of your data warehouse? So when people need access, you have a little sort of API factory, if you like, of people that know how to take that request and turn it into an API and get it published in a few weeks, maybe 3-4 weeks. They're trying to get it down to 2. That's great. Okay, I've got an API. Now what? That still doesn't necessarily serve the needs of the consumer. So then what we do is we take that API and we put a small website, an API portal on top of it. But that API portal isn't like a developer API portal. It's actually designed to show that this looks like a data source, and it has instructions how to get that data source into the analytics engines that team has been allowed to use. So maybe Tableau, or if it's an older system, they have another little app that helps them. And then what they do is every time they get one of these, they publish a new feed into this data marketplace, this place where you can find data in the enterprise. And they've done about 12 to 15 of these. And now what they're doing is, every time somebody comes in to request a data feed, they say, don't come to us first, don't submit a project, first see if there's one there that suits your needs. And what they're finding is, obviously in the beginning, often they don't find what they need. But as they've opened up the first 15 data sets, they're starting to see some overlap. And they actually believe by the time they get to about 40 or 50, they'll probably cover 70% of the use cases. And that's something very interesting in the organization. Now, instead of having to run lots of these projects that take 20 weeks, they can now run rapid projects that free up read-only data sources and then publish it and teaching the business to self-serve. So when we talk about this model, this is what we're talking about. We're not saying open everything up to everyone. What we're saying is opening up different strategies for different types of data or different type of assets, and allow different groups to access those assets through a well-defined user experience. And the problem is, like Unilever, like many customers we have, and many of your organizations, the application landscape is pretty complicated, right? So you've got the monolithic packaged applications, Oracle, IBM, SAP, Siebel, all those sorts of things. You've also got the big SaaS applications now. We're seeing a lot of SaaS adoption outside of financial services and telco, but almost every other industry is getting pretty hot on SaaS. We've also got a lot of granular SaaS applications. There's like 3,000 SaaS vendors out there, and it's growing all the time. And what's happening is the lines of business are buying these applications. When they get successful with these applications, you've got to figure out how to plug those into the other data sets that people need. Right now, that's very costly. There's a ton of custom applications, now increasingly microservices, small bits of well-defined code that run somewhere. There's lots of that, and sometimes you reuse those, sometimes you don't. When you don't, they're a microservice. When you do, it should probably be an API as a golden rule. And for some of our customers, we're seeing a lot of device requirements. IoT strategies aren't that formulated yet, except in certain industries, such as we're finding medical machinery and sort of logistics and tracking with RFID. But most other people are thinking about it. They're thinking about what does the devices mean to us, how do we connect them? But the important people here is the consumers, the people, the employees. And when I talk about the application network next, it's the consumers, it's the employees in your organization, it's the customers that you're trying to reach with your digital services. It's your partners that you're growing your ecosystem around that need some way of getting access to this information. Right, and that's the costly thing, is getting those assets buried in this mess up into the front of the business where you can actually leverage it to drive new value, new experiences, that sort of thing. And we all know what happens when we've done this the wrong way, right? You've seen this 1,000 times. If you connect them directly, what happens is you get this point-to-point mess. Because each one of these connections is invisible, right? You don't really know they're connected, like from a macro level. And each one of these creates a dependency on other applications. And you do this 10 or 15 times on a small set of apps, it's not too bad. When you're running 500 apps or 1,000 or like a Unilever 6,000 apps, you suddenly have tens of thousands of these things, and each one creates a tight coupling to other systems. So making one change in one system obviously has a massive downstream impact potentially in other systems, but you can't actually analyze that. You can't see if what's going to be impacted. So you tend to do a big sort of investigation if you change a core system, or you do what some of our customers like to do is change something and then react to the complaints you get, and hopefully you won't break anything too serious. So this isn't very good. So what we talk about is introducing some simple paradigms into the way you deliver every project. So this isn't about architecture. This is actually just about building good discipline into the way you deliver your projects. So a lot of the thinking around DevOps and a lot of thinking around agile methodologies and a lot of thinking around how and why you should build microservices, I think is pretty sound. Which is the idea that if you're going to, in the integration world at least, if you're going to connect two applications together, if you just connect them directly, there's all sorts of problems that we know about. But if, when you connect them, you actually create a reusable asset out of the data that you're accessing from those systems, you start to drive some leverage, some reuse out of those assets. That doesn't mean, because I create some reuse of a service, say, for example, I put something on top of a payment gateway, that everyone's suddenly going to need it. But what I start to do is create capabilities in my organization that people can discover and use to build new applications. We also talk about reuse of access. A lot of the customers and prospects I speak to have web services already, and the first question I always ask them is, who has access to those web services? And typically it's going to be a very small team of people that understand how they work, and nobody else knows they exist. So when we talk about APIs, or when we talk about sort of managed microservices which have an interface, we're talking about enabling different parts of the organization potentially to have access to that API. We build the connections as needed. So this, again, no one we ever speak to has a budget to stop and build something new and then bring the projects on board. I'm sure you feel the same way. You probably couldn't get a big architecture project going in your organization unless you could show positive ROI, that you could actually build that architecture with the projects that you're already delivering. And it's exactly the same across the world. It doesn't matter if you're in North America, South America, Asia, or Europe. Everyone's in that same boat. IT has a low budget, and they're not spending money unless they can actually deliver to the business. So being able to build the connection as needed, and then defining simple abstractions, such as API patterns, such as common synchronization patterns between systems, such as the microservice blueprint, as an example, that's sort of popping up around the place. These components allow us to move quite quickly to make decisions on what type of capability we're going to build when we build our projects. That's what I kind of like about the movements we're seeing right now, is we're starting to decompile or decompose big monolith applications right from the outset, or decompose the big monoliths that we've inherited over the last few years. And the point of this is, you do this with every project. So you actually build a discipline, and you do it across teams. And every time you add one of these nodes to the network, you add a reusable component, an API or a messaging interface. By the way, when I say API, I don't just mean RESTful. I also mean real-time and even batch interfaces. So even file movement falls under this. I can give you some examples of what we've done in banks, where 50% of what they do is integration, is file-based movement, but we can still run the file through an API, so it's trackable, but we give the client a file-based interface in their language, so they don't even know they're calling an API, or they don't feel the difference, so they can easily adopt it. And what starts to emerge is what we actually watching one of our customers call this the application network. So McDonald's has done this in anger in their environment to sort of, I won't go through the story right now, but they talk in terms of their customer network and their restaurant network. And the chief of digital there said, we've actually built an application network with your product. I'm like, oh, I like that, I'll take that. And I'll tell people about it. So this is essentially the application network. And the point of it is, it's not an architecture. What it is, it's a set of building blocks, a set of capabilities that you build inside your organization by the very sort of nature of building your projects. I won't have time today to go into how that happens, but we actually have a methodology on how you should think about doing it. But the point is every one of these APIs that you build for that project, so it's not been perfectly formed. You haven't got a canonical model of your customer necessarily, unless you've already got a canonical model. But if you haven't, you shouldn't be worrying about that. What you should be thinking about is creating a reasonable asset that will work within at least the domain of the application or the project that you're delivering. These things emerge bottom up. So we're doing this stuff with banks at the moment. They run across about 15, 20 teams. Each team is only building maybe one or two APIs in 3 months, but they're getting a nice pool of APIs across different disciplines within the bank, because each team is doing roughly the same thing. It's recomposable. I think we all obviously know what APIs are. I think what we may forget why they're different is, from the SOA era, for example, for anyone who did SOA, it's not just about the technology. It's not just because they use REST and JSON and that technology is more familiar with a broader set of developers. But there's a lot of capabilities that have been built into API, particularly API management, that are very relevant to the enterprise. So being able to control access through contract keys and better security mechanisms, being able to throttle, being able to provide different levels of access to different people who have access to the same API. We didn't have any of that stuff in the SOA era. We didn't really have the knowledge or some of the tools to allow us to quickly build these services in a way that we can spin them up, we can see if they work. If they don't work, we can decommission them, we can version them, we can improve on them, we can do a lot of things with APIs today that with web services just was very difficult because the tooling wasn't there, the technology was complicated, and people didn't really understand the value of it. The key to this, though, is it bends, not breaks. So I've done this, we've all built great architectures that have been really successful to a point, and then they got overused. And then the whole thing is deemed useless because it was used for the wrong thing. I've built about 3 of those. The whole point of this is that you're not building an architecture, you're giving the building blocks for architectures that sit on top of it. Right? So this is why you can actually build it incrementally, because the building blocks are just well-defined units of value. And the key thing which CIOs seem to love is, in these APIs, the security and governability and the traceability of the calls is built in. And this is what makes it a network. What we found with our customers that have built lots of APIs is they no longer want to look at the world as a list of connection points. They actually want to see, when I make a call, from a mobile app here, I actually want to trace back down to see what back-end systems are here. Now, whether you build that API using Node, whether you built it on the MuleSoft platform, whether you're using Spring Boot, doesn't matter. There's lots of great sort of gateway technology that you can put in front of those, so that you can actually capture the metadata and track everything all the way down. And it doesn't really add a lot of cost to the call chain. But the whole point for this, for us, is when we think about helping our customers build build a process for application networks, is the key to networks is every node actually has to add more value than the last. So it's not enough just to go and build these APIs and deploy them. You've got to get that reuse out of them. And that's actually what changes the speed and agility of an organization. Is not just you have the services, but you enable the users to find, access, and use them. So a lot of what we think about as architects is really the production of APIs and the production of microservices. We think about the methodology, we think about the software development lifecycle, we think about how do we do continuous integration and get through to continuous deployment. That only gets you halfway there. Getting good at that means that you can build assets that could be reused. But what we spend a lot of time on is education and strategy around how you drive the consumption model. If I think about the web, right? The web has shown us that the most complicated distributed system on Earth can be separated by 14,000 APIs that can drive all sorts of innovations. Every company that pops up, or even in the last 5 years, have built a majority of their value proposition on top of something that was really existing. They're using Google Maps. They're using all the Google APIs around suggestions, recommendation engines, AI type of analytics processing. You have to build that stuff anymore. Well, the enterprise hasn't figured this out yet. The enterprise, all their value is actually locked away in those SAP instances in that AS400 system. If I want to build a great mobile banking application, I've got to get my digital layer to talk to my core banking systems. They haven't figured out how to do this in a scalable way. And APIs on their own aren't the answer, right? So, we're not just talking about, hey, we put an API on everything and all this works. There's actually a lot more to it. One of the things that's to it is you've also got to drive the consumption. So when we talk about consumption here, we're really talking about enabling different people in the organization to get access and package those APIs in a way that they're going to understand. So remember the data marketplace example I used earlier? That's for data analysts. They wouldn't know what an API portal looked like, or if you showed them one, they'd freak out and wouldn't know what they're looking at. But for app developers, you can just publish the developer portal. That's enough. So you might offer the data marketplace as a data marketplace for developers and one for business analysts, because they have different purposes. One needs access to data to write applications. The other one wants the data to be inserted into their analytics system for reporting purposes. Right, we're using the same interfaces. That's the reuse of access. So the types of things that get stored on the application network. So I've talked about API portals, and this is really geared at enabling app developers, broadly in the organization. So whether it's more creative teams that are coming from the marketing side, whether it's core app developers in IT, whether it's SIs. The whole point of the API portals is to package that experience up so I can discover and use capabilities and services within my organization. We also have the notion of templates. So templates will exist on top of APIs and model common tasks that you'll do around orchestration or data synchronization. We're finding a big shift in the enterprise that there's a real sort of demand swelling to put simpler tools in the hands of less skilled, maybe not even developers, but sort of admin-orientated people, so they can do some of the connection work themselves. The reason why we've seen, booming SnapLogic, rise up is because they provide pretty simple web-based tools to do common connectivity tasks. Same thing with Zapier, right? So allowing that to happen inside the organization, but allowing those tools to go through controlled APIs that the central team manages and governs is pretty powerful. You can start to put more power in the hands of individuals without them creating more mess in the enterprise. And then finally, the data marketplace example I gave you earlier is an example of building a simple app on top of an API to make it more consumable. So we're starting to see, people think about the consumption experience a lot more than just the how do I unlock the asset. But the nice thing about this layer in the application network is everything is instrumented and everything is tracked. So I know, based on metrics, what people are using. I know how many people, sign up for an API key but never go to production. I know how many people rate my service 1 star. Because they're in my organization, I know who they are, I can reach out to them and try and solicit more feedback. I get that feedback and it starts to change my behavior. Now I'm not building projects for the business, I'm actually helping the business find and discover their own capabilities and fix them when they're broken. I start to learn, the consumption models that the business wants to use for a certain type of data or a certain capability. And of course, this can be used to drive investment and behavior. Right, and this we don't have in the enterprise today. We don't have that level of visibility. We don't really know quite often what's working, what's not. The way we know is because it's gone to production and nobody's shouting, so it's probably working. But we don't know whether the return on investment was there. We don't know whether other people could get leverage from it. We can't measure things like how much reuse am I driving from the APIs I'm building. And the thing is, as I said earlier, it's not about just building APIs, right? So there has to be a directed approach to this. And anyone who did SOA, which is probably everyone in this room at some point, I would imagine, you might be thinking, well, hang on a minute, SOA talked about reuse, it talked about well-defined services, it had things like a registry, you had UDI, if you want to call that a registry. Did you ever use UDI, anyone? Wow, look at that, he's so proud of himself. He's like, I figured it out! That's awesome. So the problem with SOAP and web services really was, it was never designed with the consumption model in mind. Right? No one actually really wanted anyone except expert developers to go and discover and use those services. The other problem with SOAP is it was very one-dimensional. We built SOAP services as if they were the be-all end-all of the access layer for a resource. So in what we call API-led connectivity, which is really just a methodology of how you think about the granularity of service and the ownership of a server or an API in the enterprise, web services were kind of like system-level APIs, except they were never, well, there's a couple of things. One is they sort of got a bit obsessed with trying to do canonical models. And when we talk about system APIs with our customers, we talk about providing common, consistent access to resources, but not trying to canonicalize everything. You're not trying to break down the silos at this level. At this level, what you're really trying to do is minimize the access mechanisms to the backend systems. You're trying to make it so that every time I need data from the mainframe, it doesn't turn into a 13-week project. I actually have the key resources from my mainframe available as a reasonable API. Right? And we've done this pretty successfully. I mean, with mainframe, it's kind of interesting because you have to usually do some staging or some heavy caching because mainframes aren't used to something called volumes you might get in this model. But it actually works quite well because what the consumer sees is just a set of resources. And what the mainframe sees, obviously, is a lot more complicated. You hide it behind the interface. But the difference here between SOAP and APIs or API-led is the system layer is just purely there to normalize access, right, and governance and control of the backend system. The layer above is actually the layer where you use API orchestration to pull information from different places. So if I want a single view of the customer, I might have information in my Salesforce app, I might have information in SAP. So I open up my customer data in Salesforce and SAP. I don't normalize it, I just, I normalize it a little bit maybe to remove some of the crazy German words in SAP. But the layer above, if I want to create a view of the customer, I then create a customer object at that level and call the fields or access to the fields in the APIs below. That doesn't mean that's my single view of the customer, that's my view of the customer for this project. Now somebody else might go and create another view because they'll find mine and say, you know what, that doesn't quite meet my requirements, I'm going to create a different one. And I quite often get asked, don't you get like proliferation of APIs at that mid-tier? And the answer is, yeah, you do. But the great thing of that layer, you've got two advantages. One, it's all instrumented, so you can actually see them, you can actually understand what's there. And two, it's actually really easy to refactor objects in this layer because it's sandwiched between two abstraction layers. So let me talk about the other layer. The experience layer is really the API first design layer. If you've ever heard of API first design, the idea is that you design the API for the consumption experience you want people to have. Simple example is Google Maps API. If Google Maps API had designed it from the inside out, you would see all sorts of weird information about the GIS system that really isn't relevant to you. What they said was, we're going to design the API a certain way to make it really easy to embed into web pages and add overlays. And then they work backwards from that and sticks that API together for the backend systems. Well, that's what experience level APIs are. You might do that for a single mobile app. You might do that for a single web app. These APIs, the experience layer, don't get reused that often. The point is to package the information behind them in ways that helps an app developer create a great app experience, right? The nice thing that it also does, it isolates the consumers away from the backend system. You might say, why do I need 3 layers for that? Well, sometimes you might decide, I'm going to go straight from the experience layer down to the system layer. There's some reason to do that, i.e., the cool traits from one side or the other might be too great, and you just want to grab the information and massage it in the experience layer. But by having the 3 layers, what it allows you to do is if you want to change or recompose a particular reusable service around, like say a customer, you can make changes to that layer without breaking any of the clients and any of the backend systems. So it gives you a level of flexibility and control. And then when I speak to CISOs, and usually CIOs as well these days, is the other thing I like about this model is because every API call is instrumented, because you've got to have an API key, I can now track, govern, and control everything that runs through this set of APIs. Whether maybe you've got MuleSoft down here, and you've got a bunch of microservices at the middle layer, and then you've created some front-end APIs. If we can see, if we've got a gateway in front of that, we can actually manage that thing end to end. It's a bit like if you've ever seen App Dynamics or something like that. Our management plane works a similar way. We can actually see end to end what's going on. We don't have to actually be the implementation of it. But the critical thing to this model is that's how you think about creating the APIs. But the important thing, as I keep saying, and I'll say it again, is we have this notion of building communities within organizations to help them get more successful with the APIs themselves. And I think that's the big shift here. And so if you think about application networks, it's not just about amplifying the business, which a lot of banks come to me and talk about. They want to amplify the whole business, they want to open things up. And we say, before you do that, you want to start opening up certain core functions and building communities within the bank, within the different lines of business. So you get to feel how and understand how to build these reusable assets. It's not a one-off project. It's a discipline. You're thinking about reuse of assets. You're thinking about defining simple abstractions. You keep things simple. There's only really 3 or 4 API patterns you need to implement. There's probably another 10 sort of integration patterns, and then there's obviously all the sort of reliability patterns that we all have used in different scenarios. They still matter, they still live it. But the point is that it's really driving a change in organizations. And what we've seen, I'll skip over this for a second. what we've seen is the roles in the organization start to change, right? So IT, instead of delivering projects, they still deliver some projects, they still work on the strategic stuff, but what they're not doing is spending a lot of time on the small stuff, the stuff that can be delegated out to other people who need access to data for reporting, for example. But they can direct projects, they can ensure quality, they look at the security and the reliability aspects. They own that aspect, right? Central IT still owns the security of the data. You still want to be making sure that anything that is accessible is well secured. System experts are now not needed for every project. One of the pushbacks I get here actually is system experts sometimes think they own the application, they don't want anyone else to touch it because they might be made redundant. But if you ask them, what would you do if you had 3 days a week extra than you have now? They have all these great ideas about how they'd improve the business and how they'd improve the application. The whole point of this is not to get rid of the system expert, it's to allow the system expert to be the system expert and create new value or simplify things or automate things that aren't getting automated. Architects. I sort of started in the beginning here. I'm seeing a lot more architects getting focused on individual projects versus thinking about how do we drive value, across our portfolio. It's just a natural thing that happens when you get so focused on delivery that it's all hands on deck to get things done. Well, what we're seeing is architects in this mode can actually start to do things that they've always wanted to do but didn't have time to or didn't have the raw material to do it with. It's amazing what will happen even with 4 or 5 APIs, how you can start to fix some of the things that were broken before. Now finally, the lines of business, instead of requesting projects, you start teaching them to self-serve some of that capability themselves. And that's the key thing. This is what I think. I also have a fair few sort of COO and CEO conversations. This is the sort of, they like to know more about this. They like to understand, what does it mean for my business? What is it going to feel like? And they like the fact that there is a way to change the balance between IT and the business. And that IT isn't just there to serve the business and deliver projects, but they're there as an equal partner to drive the strategy of the company. And it's amazing, we're talking about APIs and microservices, and we always hear the small, narrow, how to build them, what to do. But in reality, they have the potential to completely change the landscape of business. And I think, I wanted to talk about this as an architecture conference because I don't think we always see that. But in the conversations I'm having, I'm seeing it every single day. And it's exciting. I don't know if you know, but I'm an architect by trade. And I still love thinking about how to solve complex problems. But this, for me, is probably one of the most exciting things or turn of events that I've seen in quite a while. Thank you.
No sé si quieren arrancar una ronda de preguntas. Can you answer some questions?
Yeah, well, if there's any questions, we'd be happy to.
Someone? No?
It's okay.
Yeah.
For you, talk about the delivery process from the...
Yes, you were talking about the software delivery process that starts when you develop and finally it drives to the business people that have to sell that kind of thing. For you, for your opinion, which will be the best way to make sure that trip from the development of the project to selling?
Yeah. So the one thing we find that works best is if there's good sponsorship at the architecture and at the leadership level. And the reason being is you can imagine this can make a lot of sense and you can start doing it, but then the workload gets too great and you don't have time even to think about what the API might be for this project. And you just say, you know what, I'm just going to do this project quickly because we've got to get it done. And what you need is some sort of executive oversight that gives you a bit of air cover that says, hey, look, we're actually doing this as a strategy. And That gives you a bit of room, especially in the first few months as you start to think about how you would drive the strategy, so that you can actually drive those projects through the right way. That's the biggest risk. So it's not magic. It's not something I've seen people do it on their own. You've seen companies like Spotify figure out this type of model, variants of this model. To do it in an existing enterprise, it definitely helps to have sponsorship. Unless you have a strong, sort of chief architect or somebody that can give you air cover and champion the cause. What I do find though is once you do the first couple of projects, the business get pretty excited because they start to see the benefits, and it creates a lot more pull. It's really like the first 6 to 12 months where it's most difficult.
One more?
Can you show the slide you skipped? I think it's very graphic. The slide you skip about the process and
oh yeah. So yeah, very quickly, I have another part of the presentation where I build this out and show you how you build a project this way, but it takes another 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So rather than keeping you here all night, I didn't do that. But what happens is that project, by virtue that you've just created the assets, not because you had to do anything else, starts to become part of the application network because, at least with our platform, but I think other platforms are going to follow, when you create an API, you don't have to specifically say anymore, I'm going to go manage that and make it available. It becomes available because you created it, right? So that appears in the application network. So what developers see in the engagement layer, in our speakers exchange, we have a product called Exchange, they now see the new assets that are available to them. So for next projects, you start training also the developers or the other users to go there first. Right? So it sounds simple because we do this on the web, but we haven't created it in the enterprise. And I think the timing is right in the market where the leadership is starting to realize that they actually have to create the same capability in the enterprise. And that's kind of what's exciting. It's not that it's all brand new or anything, it's just the timing is perfect. Thank you.
The last one.
Okay.
Yes, you talk about bank transformation and your experience. What can you talk about about transformation in tech industry and all the thing about being digital and also about C-level talks about this transformation you mentioned here?
In the tech industry?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I'm actually very familiar because we have most of the big tech companies, everyone from sort of Tesla, Salesforce, ServiceNow, Netflix, Spotify, Airbnb. So we actually have a very good base of tech companies. The reason why they like this model, and bear in mind, right, so there's sort of like Netflix who build their platform with microservices, that's their product. But they also have a big IT organization, right? So let's just separate those two for a second because they behave quite differently. And they like this approach for a couple of reasons. Many of them have very aggressive expansion goals. So a lot of them, they're looking to, quadruple their revenue in the next 5 years. To do that, they realize they've got to expand, obviously, their footprint of people, which also expands their footprint of applications. So they're looking at ways that they can introduce new applications quickly, but unplug them again if they decide they don't work. I don't know if you've ever experienced it, but at MuleSoft we do this quite a lot. Our marketing team gets some sort of marketing app. There seems to be like 1,000 of them, and they start using it, and then they realize it's not quite what they need, and they switch it off again. But they've asked our IT team to connect it in, but we want to switch. They want to switch it off as quickly as they switched it on. Well, tech companies are a bit like that. They're a bit fickle, and we make changes quickly. And in that environment, you want something that allows you to change. And this model is built for change. We don't API everything. Like we don't put in MuleSoft, we don't put an API in front of every new application that we attach. But as soon as we believe we attach it to the APIs that exist for some of our marketing objects like customer or user or whatever else. So we tied it into that. So if we have to unplug them again, we just break that connection, but nothing else changes. So, and we're doing that in every one of those companies I just mentioned, except for Tesla. They're a little bit different. But everyone else is running the exact same strategy.
Thank you.
Thank you.